There's something about secrets. They start small, almost innocent, but grow into something you can't contain. Imagine building a life with someone, only to feel it slipping through your fingers as passion and betrayal weave a web too tangled to escape. This is the story of Justine, torn between a steady marriage with Tom and the dangerous allure of Jake. But what begins as a craving for connection soon unravels into a chilling confrontation, a devastating revelation, and a revenge so calculated it leaves no room for redemption. How does a love so secure turn into a battlefield, and at what cost? Stay with me as we dive into this heart-pounding tale of choices, consequences, and the price of betrayal.
It's strange how routine can feel like both a shield and a cage. Tom and I had built a life together, predictable, steady, and, well, maybe a little too predictable. I told myself it was enough. But then came Jake. He wasn't just a man. He was the antithesis of my quiet life. Every word he said, every glance he gave me, felt like a secret rebellion against the monotony. I knew it was wrong, yet I couldn't stop thinking about him. How did I end up here, tiptoeing on the edge of something that could destroy everything? The tension between the comfort of stability and the thrill of passion began to consume me. And I started to question if I even deserved the life I was holding onto so tightly. Jake wasn't planned. He wasn't even an option, or at least that's what I told myself in the beginning. But as the days turned into weeks, the moments we shared began to pull me into a world I never thought I'd crave. Tom had always been my constant, steady, dependable, safe. Yet, with Jake, there was this magnetic pull, like he saw parts of me I had long forgotten. It was intoxicating. But with every fleeting moment of passion, a darker shadow loomed over me. Could I really juggle these two worlds without losing myself, or worse, everything? The duality of it all started to gnaw at my soul, as if my choices were whispering to me, daring me to choose. So I used to think betrayal was a black and white thing, an act, a choice, a definitive moment. But now, living in this unspoken triangle, I've realized it's a slippery slope, paved with small justifications and quiet compromises. I rationalized every stolen glance, every hidden message, convincing myself it didn't mean anything. But deep down, I knew better. Every step I took toward Jake seemed to pull me further from the life I had built with Tom. And yet, I couldn't stop. The thrill of it made me feel alive in a way I hadn't in years. But at what cost? It felt like walking a tightrope, with the ground crumbling beneath me. And still, I couldn't look back, because looking back meant facing the crack side. Already made, Tom used to laugh more. I still remember how his eyes would crinkle when he'd tell some terrible dad joke at dinner, and we'd both end up laughing until we cried. Those moments are like distant echoes now, drowned out by the constant hum of his work. Somewhere along the line, his dedication to building a future for us became an obsession, and I was left holding the pieces of what used to be. I tried to justify it. After all, he was doing this for us, wasn't he? But the more he worked, the more I felt like a ghost in our home, invisible and unheard. And when Jake appeared, noticing me in a way Tom no longer did, it felt like breathing fresh air for the first time in years. Our mornings used to be filled with laughter and lazy cups of coffee. Now, they're a blur of Tom rushing out the door, his phone already glued to his ear. I'd sit there in silence, the sound of the door closing behind him echoing in the quiet house. It wasn't like I planned to drift away from him. But when someone shows you attention, real attention, you start to question the love you've grown used to. I'd replay moments from our early days, trying to remember the last time Tom really looked at me, really saw me. And in those moments of longing, Jake's attention became a lifeline, a reminder that I was still someone worth noticing. It's not like I didn't try to fix things. I dropped hints, left notes, suggested weekend getaways, anything to remind Tom of what we had before. But each time, the excuses were the same: I'm swamped, next week, I promise, this is for us, Justine. I wanted to believe him, but the gap between us kept widening, and I started to feel like I was screaming into a void. And then Jake came along with his easy smile and undivided attention, making me feel seen in ways I hadn't in years. It wasn't just attraction, it was escape. But even as I clung to that feeling, I couldn't ignore the weight of what I was risking. How could I balance the pieces of a love that felt like it was slipping through my fingers every time I look at Jacob? A mix of emotions hits me like a tidal wave: pride, love, and a guilt so heavy it's suffocating. He's my son in every way that matters, but the truth is a secret I carry alone. Tom doesn't know, and I've spent years convincing myself he never needs to. Jacob's laugh echoes through the house, filling the void that had grown between Tom and me. Yet, every time I see his eyes, Jake's eyes, I'm reminded of the line I crossed. It's a secret I've buried so deep, but it scratches at the surface when I least expect it, taunting me with the weight of what I've done. How long can I live this lie before it consumes me? Tom has always been a devoted father, and watching him with Jacob both warms and breaks my heart. He doesn't just see a child, he sees his legacy, his reason for working so hard. And while I've tried to lock away the truth, moments slip through the cracks. When Jacob laughs in that mischievous way, when he tilts his head the way Jake does, I catch my breath and hope Tom doesn't notice. I tell myself that biology doesn't matter, that Jacob is ours in every way that counts. But the truth sits there like an unwelcome guest, one I can't banish no matter how hard I try. And every passing day feels like borrowed time before everything unravels. There are nights when I lie awake, staring at the ceiling, and wonder how different my life would have been if I'd made other choices. I never planned for this, to keep such a monumental truth hidden from the man I promised forever. But every time I imagine telling Tom, the fear of losing Jacob, of losing everything, paralyzes me. I convince myself that keeping this secret is for the best, that protecting Jacob's world is worth the weight I bear. But some days, I catch Tom looking at Jacob with such pride, and it feels like a betrayal I can't take back. How much longer can I pretend this doesn't haunt me? How much longer until this secret destroys the fragile balance I've built? At first, I thought I was imagining things, small changes in Tom's behavior that felt like ripples on the surface of calm waters. He started watching me differently, his eyes lingering just a second longer than usual, as if searching for something hidden. The casual, "How was your day?" began to carry a weight it hadn't before, like he was fishing for clues without tipping his hand. I'd laugh off his sudden interest in my schedule, but inside, my heart raced. Was he starting to piece things together, or was it just paranoia? Either way, it felt like the walls around my carefully constructed world were starting to close, and Tom's intuition has always been sharp, though I used to admire it more when it wasn't pointed at me. It started with little things, him double-checking my excuses, commenting on how I seemed distracted, or casually asking who I'd been texting so late at night. I brushed it off, pretending I didn't notice the quiet tension building between us. But deep down, I knew he wasn't the type to ignore what didn't add up. Every time he brought up a missed dinner or a late meeting, my mind scrambled for an answer that wouldn't unravel everything. Each excuse I made felt like a new thread in a web I wasn't sure I could keep weaving up. There's a way Tom's silence speaks louder than his words ever could. Lately, it's been deafening. He's stopped asking outright, but I can feel the doubt simmering beneath his calm demeanor. And then there are the flashbacks, the times he looked at me with pure trust, the quiet evenings we used to share without a hint of suspicion. It's almost cruel how much those memories hurt now. I tell myself I'm just imagining it, that he couldn't possibly know. But the cracks are there, widening with every passing day. And the worst part? He hasn't said anything yet, which only makes me more terrified of what's coming. It feels like I'm standing at a crossroads, with one path leading to the stability I've known and the other to the fire I can't seem to resist. Tom represents everything solid and secure in my life, a foundation I've built my world on. And yet, Jake is the spark that reminds me I'm still alive, that I'm more than a wife and mother. I try to tell myself I can have both, that I can keep these worlds separate without them colliding. But the longer I walk this tightrope, the shakier it becomes. Each decision feels like a thread being pulled, unraveling the life I've tried so hard to keep intact. Jake doesn't ask for much, which somehow makes it harder. He doesn't push me to leave, doesn't demand more than I'm willing to give. But that quiet patience is its own kind of pressure. Every time I see him, it's like stepping into another reality, one where passion eclipses responsibility, where I'm free from the weight of my secrets. And then I go home to Tom, to the man who's always been my anchor, and I wonder if I've become someone I don't even recognize. The pull between them is tearing me apart, and the more I try to justify my actions, the less I believe my own lies. I tell myself I'm doing this for Jacob, that my choices are keeping his world intact. But how long can I hide behind that excuse? There's a moment every night, after the house is quiet, when I ask myself if I'm willing to lose everything. 4 fleeting moments of passion. And yet, the thought of letting go of Jake feels like cutting away a part of myself. It's selfish, I know, but I'm trapped in a cycle of wanting more while fearing the consequences of taking it. I know a decision is inevitable. The cracks are growing, and the longer I wait, the more I risk everything slipping through my fingers. Tom has always been methodical, a man who thrives on order and precision. It's one of the things I admired about him, until now. Lately, his calm feels like something else entirely, like the quiet before a storm. I didn't notice it at first, the way he seemed to let things slide, barely reacting to my late nights or vague explanations. But now, looking back, I see it clearly. His patience wasn't forgiveness. It was strategy. He's watching, waiting, piecing together a puzzle I've been desperate to hide. And that realization sends a chill through me. What does he know? What is he planning? The change was so subtle, I almost missed it. He stopped asking questions, stopped making comments about my schedule or distracted mood. I thought it meant he didn't care anymore, that he was too buried in work to notice the cracks in our life. But now, it feels different. There's a weight to his silence, a focus in his eyes when he thinks I'm not looking. And then there are the odd moments, the locked drawer in his office, the way he checks his phone with a guarded expression. It's as if he's building something in secret, something that will make everything I've tried to hide come crashing down. I can't shake the feeling that Tom's one step ahead of me, that he's waiting for the right moment to strike. The thought of him knowing, of him unraveling every carefully placed lie, is terrifying. But it's the not knowing that's worse. I've caught myself watching him the way he used to watch me, searching for clues, for signs of what he's planning. The tension between us is suffocating, yet he says nothing. His calm facade makes it impossible to tell how close I am to losing everything. And that's the cruelest part, knowing the truth is out there, lurking, but not knowing when it will. Finally surfaced. It was supposed to be a celebration, a rare night out, just the two of us. Tom had been unusually attentive all week, pulling me closer with his small gestures, his warm smiles. I almost let myself believe we were finding our way back to each other. But as we sat at that candlelit table, the air around him felt different, heavy, deliberate. I could feel his eyes on me, steady and unyielding, as if he were peeling back every layer I tried so hard to protect. My heart raced, though I masked it with forced smiles and polite laughter. And then he spoke, his voice calm but sharp, the words cutting through the air like glass. "There's something I've been meaning to talk to you about." At first, I thought he was leading up to something innocent, maybe a confession of his own, or an attempt to reconnect. But then he reached into his jacket and pulled out a folder, sliding it across the table like it was a gift. My stomach twisted as I opened it, and the contents hit me like a physical blow. Photos, messages, even a test result, evidence I hadn't even realized he could access. Each piece felt like a nail in the coffin of the life I'd been clinging to. I stammered, searching for words, for excuses, for anything that could explain away what he'd found. But his expression was unshakable, like he'd already decided how this night would end. The silence between us grew unbearable as he laid out each piece of evidence with excruciating precision. It wasn't loud or dramatic, it was calculated. A slow unraveling of the life I thought I'd kept hidden. My mind raced, grasping for something to say, but nothing I could muster would undo the damage. When he reached the test result, the one confirming Jacob's parentage, my breath caught in my throat. I wanted to beg, to explain, to remind him of everything we'd built together. But the way he looked at me, so cold and certain, told me. He wasn't interested in explanations. This wasn't a conversation. It was an execution. I couldn't breathe. My hands trembled as I tried to close the folder, to push it away as though that would undo the damage it had done. "Tom, please." I started, my voice breaking under the weight of desperation. But his expression remained unchanged, carved from stone. I reached for his hand across the table, searching for the man I once knew, the man who would forgive me for anything. "We were happy once," I whispered, trying to summon the memories that might soften him. But his gaze held no warmth, only the cold, sharp edge of betrayal. My words felt small and useless against the avalanche of his certainty. "I didn't mean for this to happen," I said, my voice cracking as I clung to the only defense I could find. I poured out words like a flood, trying to explain the loneliness, the longing, the ways I had felt invisible. I wanted him to see me, to see the woman who had once been so devoted to him, to us. But every word seemed to fall into an abyss, swallowed by the emptiness between us. He didn't interrupt, didn't raise his voice, but the way he watched me, it was as if he was already miles away. I wanted to scream, to cry, to break through that wall he'd built, but I could see it in his eyes. I was too late. Tom's silence was deafening. He sat there, unmoving, as I scrambled to salvage the ruins of our life. "Think about Jacob," I pleaded, the name hanging between us like a fragile thread. For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of emotion cross his face, but it was gone. Just as quickly. "I'm sorry," I said again, as if those words could erase the years of deceit. But his response was chilling in its simplicity. "So am I." He rose from the table with deliberate calm, leaving me sitting there, drowning in the aftermath of his quiet devastation. As he walked away, I realized the truth. I wasn't just losing him, I'd already lost myself. I should have known Tom wouldn't let it end there. His calm that night wasn't surrender, it was strategy. The first blow came the next morning when I tried to use our joint account and found it frozen. Panic set in as I scrambled to make sense of what was happening. The messages started flooding in after that, cold, clinical emails from his lawyer outlining the divorce, the division of assets, the custody agreement. It was all laid out with brutal precision. The life we'd built together was dismantled, piece by piece, and I was powerless to stop it. He wasn't just leaving, he was erasing me from his world, one calculated move at a time. Then came Jake. I hadn't spoken to him since the confrontation, but I knew Tom had. It was clear when Jake called me in a panic, his voice shaking as he told me he'd been fired. Tom hadn't stopped at just ending our marriage, he'd reached into Jake's world, too, unraveling his career with the same cold precision he'd used on me. I could hear the fear in Jake's voice, the disbelief as he tried to piece together how it had all gone so wrong. And yet, I couldn't bring myself to feel anything but numb. Tom wasn't just punishing me. He was dismantling everything I'd chosen over him, leaving no room for escape or redemption. By the end of the week, my belongings were boxed up and waiting for me in the driveway. Tom hadn't said a word, but his actions spoke louder than any argument ever could. He'd thought of everything, the accounts, the house, even the friends I thought were mine. One by one, they distanced themselves, their loyalty silently shifting to him. He wasn't just ending our marriage, he was rewriting the narrative, casting himself as the victim and me as the villain. And maybe I deserved it. But standing there, surrounded by the wreckage of my choices, I couldn't help but wonder how much of me would survive this. When Tom handed me the check, it felt like the final blow. The amount wasn't significant, just enough to remind me of what I had brought into the marriage. "This is yours," he said, his voice calm but devoid of any emotion. I stared at the piece of paper in my hand, the weight of his words pressing down on me. It wasn't just about the money. It was his way of making it clear, everything else was his, and I was no longer part of it. My throat tightened as I tried to respond. But what could I say? He'd already taken everything I had to give, leaving me with nothing but the sharp edge of regret. His final words still echo in my mind. There was no shouting, no anger, just a chilling finality. "There's no coming back from this," he said, his eyes locking with mine one last time before he walked away. I wanted to chase after him, to scream that I was sorry, to beg for forgiveness. But my feet stayed rooted to the ground, as if they knew the truth before my heart did. Watching him leave felt like the door closing on a chapter I'd spent years writing, only to see it end in ashes. And as I stood there, clutching the check in trembling hands, I realized I'd crossed a line I could never undo now. The house feels emptier than ever, and the silence is deafening. Jacob plays in the other room, oblivious to the chaos unraveling around him. I watch him and wonder what his future will look like, what pieces of this fractured life I can salvage for him. I have nothing left, no home, no partner, no safety net. And yet, as I sit in the stillness, I can't help but confront the choices that led me here. I don't know where to go from this point, or if I'll ever be whole again. But one thing is clear: this is the end. And it's one I'll have to live with for the rest of my life.
Keep watching our stories by clicking on one of the videos that appear on the screen, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to be alerted about new videos. See you next time.